Today on Keep Classical Weird, I talk with oboist Catherine Lee about all kinds of subjects related to her new album. You'll see why, but the subject of silkworms came up a lot.
So as a silkworm stage, it's like they're eating. Then they cocoon, and then they mate, and then they're dead.
That was the most eloquent description of the life cycle. The Silkies. Welcome, friends, to episode 46 of Keep Classical Weird. I am your host, Casey Bozell, and today we're talking to Dr. Catherine Lee, a Portland-based oboist who will be releasing her new album on May 21st. The album is titled Remote Together, and it's a very unique take on modern classical music. I mean that in the best way. Catherine performs on oboe, English horn, and oboe d'amore, and she's joined by electronic and synthesized sounds as well as field recordings from nature. Altogether, this creates a duality on the micro and macro level, and this is what I love about Catherine's CD. Her musical voice is influenced from absolutely everything around her, from the tangible to conceptual. And though the makeup of the instrumentation might lean towards arcane, it's somehow extremely accessible. I was thrilled to catch up with my good friend and hear about her global journey, her educational influences, and her process of developing her unique improvisational language. Her album, Remote Together, will be available for purchase on Bandcamp, and you can attend her release party on May 21st for free. Details are on her website, catherinemlee.com. That's Catherine with a C. Enjoy! How long have you been playing the oboe, and how did you start?
Well, I don't really want to give away my age here, but I've been playing a really long time.
Fair, totally fair.
Yeah, I've been playing a long time. I started when I was 13. That's when we start. I'm Canadian. It's an important part of the puzzle. Because in Canada, we start band when we're 13. You start when you're younger here. You start in like grade 5 or 6, right? Like we start in grade 7.
Yeah, well, yeah, for the places that have that available, that's usually about where it
if
starts.
they have
it's like grade 5 and
available.
6.
Yeah, they start.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, if a school has band, they start in grade 7 because that's our beginning of middle school. So, but before then, we'd moved around a lot as I was a kid, and my mom decided that we needed some sort of musical education. So she was my very first music teacher, and she played violin. So,
very cool.
Yeah, she taught me and my brother violin for a couple of years, and then when we moved to Edmonton, she got us lessons with this lovely lady, and then we would go. And then, so I played violin for about 10 years before I played the oboe. My brother played the oboe first, and he wasn't very good at it. Right. And so you see where this is going, the sibling rivalry.
Of course.
Yeah. So I wanted to be better than him at something. So that was why I originally picked up the oboe. But that said, as soon as I played the oboe, like it felt right. And I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is it. It was so strong. I remember it to this day. Like, it was just like this, like, boom, the way the sound was, it was just everything about it. I was like, this is my home now.
Oh, wow. Was it the sound that first captivated you? And you said it was the way it felt. Was that, do you mean physically, or like how the instrument responded to you, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I thought about it a lot, and I've noticed it like with other students, and I've actually a discussion with another oboist who I played in orchestra in Quebec with for a long time. Both of us, we loved playing together, and one day it came up that she had also played the violin for many years before she picked up an oboe, and that it just felt right to her. And then she was like, it was the E string. And I was like, yeah, it was the E string. So like, I've often thought, because I love the violin listening to people play it, but I've often thought if I had picked up a viola, maybe I would have been a violist. Like, I think that's what like, I think it's like the way, because like, when you're playing an instrument, your body's vibrating essentially.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And I think there was a certain way that my body is I think there's a certain way that everyone's body is comfortable vibrating, quite honestly. And that kind of determines like what instruments we play. Because my mom also played viola, and then my brother switched to viola later. And I was like, I wonder if I'd never played viola. If I had then switched to viola, if I would have been like, oh, I'm home.
Right.
Because I love those lines, like, in orchestra and like English horn, all those lines with like the violas and the cellists and the trombones, they have all that like nice, juicy, like inner voice stuff. I love that stuff. That's where
fascinating.
So I wonder sometimes like if it was more like just where the pitches were, and it just is kind of like, oh yeah.
It just got that particular timbre up there just got a little too E string.
Because it's real East, like, and often on the violin, you're playing up there a lot. Maybe as a second violinist or not, but like as a first violinist, you're always kind of up there, whereas like with the viola, it's just lower, it's darker.
Yes.
Yeah. So I often wonder about that, but that's how I found the oboe. And then that's kind of just what I did. I just couldn't imagine doing anything else.
That's really cool. That's very cool. I often wonder myself if I had gone into some sort of wind instrument, like made that change. Because I also at one point wanted to play the oboe. I've probably told you this before, but the line was too long to try it out. So I ended up in the violin line instead. Like it was literally happenstance. But I mean, knowing myself now, I don't think with these lungs that I got, I don't think I'm genetically inclined to be a wind player whatsoever. I think I ended up with the right instrument for me, for sure. But that's interesting that you were on a different instrument for so long. And then you're like, oh, no, it's this. That's interesting journey.
Yeah. And it was like within a year, like I was better on the oboe than I'd ever been on violin. I mean, granted, I knew how to read music and but it was just
right.
Like, so like, it wasn't that I had to learn to read music or notation or thing, because it was the same clef even, so
so there was a good connection there.
Yeah, it was just like a really quick. Actually, I remember one year, I think because at home we have Kiwanis Festival, it's just like a music festival, and I think one year did I do like the same piece on oboe and violin, like it was like something like that, like I was doing like the same repertoire, or I played something on oboe I just played on violin. It was something like that. It was pretty quick, though I loved my violin teacher. She was a lovely lady, and I loved the teacher, but I never felt right.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating.
So that's
that's so cool. And then you went to college.
Yes, I went to McGill for my undergraduate. And then I went back to Edmonton for a couple of years. I don't know, to hang out and kind of decide what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
And then I just was like, I just want to see like what I can do. I wasn't even thinking of like what would happen, probably not the most logical way of doing things, but I was like, I just want to see what I can do, and so then I went to Indiana and I did a master's degree and a diploma there. And then I went back to McGill and I did a doctorate there. That's a pretty common, like the McGill, Indiana, McGill Indiana. Indiana is a pretty common school for Canadians to go to, because it's one of it's a great school, but it's not so, a lot of the schools in the States are very expensive. But Indiana, because it was a state school, was a little bit more doable.
Sure.
A fortune. And ironically, I went to Indiana specifically because of an English teacher from England, and I was born in England. So I went to study with him thinking that maybe I would want to go back to England one day. And then he left after a year. And then the other teacher that had been at McGill, not my teacher in my undergrad, but the principal of MSO, ended up being the teacher at Indiana. So it was just really odd. And then then he went back to MSO and I went back up with him. So it was just this really kind of bizarre thing. So that I studied in the States, but I never studied with any like American school players.
Oh, that's
Right.
funny.
Even though Ted Baskin was from, I mean, he went to Curtis, so he is American school, but he's from Montreal Symphony. So like I've never studied with, my teachers have all been kind of from, Montreal or Europe or
right. How did you end up here?
So I ended up here because when I was in my doctorate, I met my now husband, and he was in England. And so we were going back and forth between Montreal and England. Oof. And then I was finishing my doctorate, he was finishing his postdoc, and we were looking to get closer together. So he got the job in Oregon. Actually, by miles, it's probably a little bit further apart, but it's on the same continent, so it seems closer. So then we got married, and then I moved down here.
Okay, cool. So he was employed here first, and then you were able to come. Okay.
He was employed here. Yeah, so he was employed here for a year. So I came to visit him, but I kept my big, I was playing with some orchestras in Quebec. So I kept my jobs there. And so I would come down and visit him, and then I would go back there for, a month or two. And, but then we got married in February. So, and then I came down, but then I couldn't work for 2 years just because of the way things were while I was waiting for papers. And so I ended up keeping my things in Canada, going back and forth until I had my green card. So it's, I think if he had been American, I would have been allowed to work, but I wouldn't have been able to leave. But because he was an American, I couldn't work, but I was able to travel. It's like, they're all just such different, configurations of rules for people. But we were really glad when it was all sorted out, and
I bet
we proved that yes, our marriage was valid. I mean, it took a while, but it was not like terrifying, like you hear about some like really, because we did everything exactly by the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like I couldn't even volunteer to do something that someone might have been able to get paid for. So like I could do nothing here. I couldn't volunteer. I couldn't, which in some ways that actually helped lead me down the path I'm on now, because I just continued doing research that I got interested in my doctorate, and I just kept on researching.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you had this period of like 2 years where you couldn't actually go and, do work or perform or whatever.
Well, I could in Canada, so I would set up stuff there.
Right. But here you go. Okay. What were you researching?
I was really interested in, so my doctorate, I had written about 3 performer composers and how they had written concertos. They'd use the genre of the day, the concerto, to write for themselves, and kind of like the language that they had filled it with, and then how they created resonances with their respective audiences. And one was from Dresden, one was from Mannheim, and one was from London. And so the different places really had very different musical scenes as well, right? Which was really interesting. And the one that I like really captured my imagination, maybe because I'm English as well, and it kind of, I could see all those places that he had played, was Fischer. And he was an 18th century oboist, and his concertos used a lot of folk songs. And like, like just like this final movement is theme and variations on such and such folk song. And I kind of love that. Like, it was almost like us writing a piece on a Joni Mitchell song or something, like, because I love folk music. And I love singer-songwriters. It's probably my favorite thing to listen to. So I love that like kind of spontaneity. So I kind of kept on doing research into them, and then kind of like what my role was as a modern player playing their works, and how we can be informed by looking at, the different topics they're using, or their use of register, their use of phrasing, their use of, kind of all those kind of things. And then I went to some conferences and spoke about that, and it just made me question like what like if I had to choose things that I was interested in, like what would those be? Like what's my voice?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I really kind of continued down that path, like just out of personal interest, like just, like what are the sounds I really like on the oboe and why do I like those? And how do I share those? And just that. So that kind of more of like philosophical question. I had a lot of time to think. I think a lot.
Right.
Those are kind of the ideas, kind of, and then those really planted. That's really kind of planted. Those ideas filter through kind of all my work. I would say. I would just say like I don't have like the typical like oboist career.
Well, that's what I was gonna say is that you're finding sounds like that are informed by things that are from so long ago, and yet it looks like you're applying those to brand new music. You're applying those performance practices. Would you say that?
Kind of. Yeah, like I would say, so there's this book that I love called Musica Poetica by Bartel, and he goes through all these rhetorical figures. Okay, this is me totally nerding out right now. Just
great.
Okay.
That's exactly the energy we want. Yes.
Okay. So like he talks about all these rhetorical figures. So then I started thinking about, well, this is that person's type of ornamentation. What would my type of ornamentation be? And like the things that I really dig, I really like playing multiphonics. I like timbral things. I like timbral trills and stuff. So like if I was to create my own like improvising language, right? What would that be? And what does that look like? And who do I play with that? So that's kind of what I became really interested in. And I still feel like the piece that I have on this new CD that's me playing with Silk Moths, I still feel like that is so grounded in the practice of performance practice. Like it's not just me playing whatever I want, it's very informed from these other places.
We're going to talk about the Silk Moths for sure. I want to talk about it looks like you've taken a lot of very purposeful turns to find your own voice, to say like, this is, like you've done all this research and you've done all these performances and you've studied and you've gone down this path, and it seems like the purpose, maybe this wasn't the intended purpose, but it seems like maybe the result is that, well, this is my voice. This is my contribution to the genre. This is how I find my way forward as an artist. And that's cool that you went about that from such an academic standpoint, rather than a lot of us, I think, just kind of trial and error for decades. And then we're like, well, I kind of like that. But you seem to gather a lot of external sources to really inform what direction you were going to go.
Yeah. I think I remember seeing how my advisor for my doctorate would work on something. She has since passed away, but she was very sick with MS. And so she needed people to like be around her to help her do like, certain things. And she was always very careful about who she chose to do what with, because she's like, oh, so-and-so was very good at choosing out these things. But like I, for example, she took me once to the hardware store, but she's in this like electric, like wheelchair and like zipping up and down the aisles. And she was like, no, you're not coming to the hardware store again with me. Like she wanted the tall guys to go to the hardware store with her. That was, you know what I mean? Because they were good at doing whatever. But when it was thinking about the placement of a painting in her living room, that was me, but just so she was very selective about what. And so sure. I would also see she was a real firecracker, and I'm so grateful to her because she taught me to write, and I didn't know how to write, and I'm still learning how to write, but she started me on that journey. And I feel like a lot of what I have learned has been because then I want to do it and then I want to write about it. Like it's and then that's kind of how I process it on a different level. But because I would be in kind of all these situations with her, I would see how she would work on something. And it's like, she would work on something from like she'd work on it from like an academic point of view. And then she'd be like, let's go to the museum. And she'd like go to the museum. And it was like, I'm going to this 17th century show because I just want to see the paintings that so-and-so might have seen when they were reading such and such book. and then she would like go and do, so it was like this like real like embodied way of learning and coming out with what she had to say. And her writing was profound, and she was an amazing writer. And I'm not looking to write as she did, but I was like, wow, that such a window into a process, like just to embed yourself in all those things. And then like certain things kind of filter up.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like you remember the way the light hits a certain picture, and you remember how this felt on the floor, or walking on the floor, or you remember like, and then that's kind of how you put together your thing.
Yeah.
But it's
Wow. Very
because
cool.
you've been so immersed in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a
Wow.
choice. It's not compulsive. You're not choosing something because it's compulsive. I've also done a lot of work with like somatics and like Feldenkrais. And for him, even if the choice you have is a good one, you still have to have more, because you don't want to, it's not a compulsive choice. You have to be able to make more than one choice. So anything that's compulsive, even if it's good, it's still not good.
Interesting.
Right? So trying to
Okay.
not have that compulsivity, like be like, okay, well, what is it that just kind of finding points of resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, that's very cool. Let's talk about your new album. So how did this come about? How did this whole concept come about?
Well, the last one I did was really solo works that had already been written that I found, and they're a lot by Canadian composers. So this time I really wanted to approach people to write for me. And I wanted to approach people. I'm really interested in scores, like what could be contained in different types of scores, and, graphic or words or whatever. So all the people that are on there, except for Jordan Nobles, who I've never actually met, but I love his piece. And it's supposed to be for an ensemble, and he let me do a solo version of it. But
Cool.
all the others were people that I know and know my playing. And I was just so grateful that they agreed to write me something, because I love their music. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah. So that it just kind of came about by asking,
It's amazing how far you can go by asking. I didn't think that when I first started out, but yeah.
And having a conversation, like these are all people who I'd played works by them before. So that's how that bought, or like they taught, like Julian was teaching at Willamette at the time, and I'd walk by and I'd hear him doing all this really cool stuff on piano and be like, oh, that's so cool. What would he do with an oboe? Like I just, and he'd come to a concert where I had first played Taylor's piece, and Julian's really into microtonality, and Taylor's really into microtonalities. So then I was like, oh, I wonder if Julian would consider, writing me something. So then he wrote me something. Yeah, so it was just that's how asking people, and I think I asked them to write something for oboe d'amore, English horn, with either fixed media or electronics. Like it was like wide open. And then
wow,
like I didn't know what I was going to get.
Yeah.
Did
you give them any sort of direction as to like inspiration or like any sort of boundaries, or were you just like, I do this all the time when I ask people to compose for me, I'm like, can you just write me something? And they're like, yeah. And like, maybe, so were there any other guidelines other than like, please write me something?
Sometimes they ask me questions. Like I think Taylor had asked for, he knew that I improvised. And then I just released the album with my duo partner, Matt, and we have the Lee Hannafin duo. So I sent him some tracks of that and said, this is, getting back to the idea of language. This is the type of language I'm used to kind of using. This is like kind of where I kind of go with this. I don't have to go there, but this is where I, kind of I'm interested in experimenting. And because most of it does end up being microtonal, but I'm not necessarily coming to it from a microtonal perspective. Whereas Taylor is a microtonal composer, and the score that I got from him was very specific. Like, this is a 16th tone, this is an 8th tone, and this is a quarter tone.
Whoa.
And this is other, right, like our regular notation. So his score was very specific. Like, it wasn't just like, and pitch bend,
right?
Like it was like, because some of them are like Julian's is more like, and pitch bend and find your way into this and blah, blah. But Taylor's was very specific. And then as I've gotten to, because I played that a lot and I love playing that piece. That's Alluvium. I mean, I love playing all of these pieces, but the ones I've probably played the most are, or performed the most in concerts have been like Chanson and Alluvium. Yeah, and I often pair them back to back because Julian's wasn't, I did some concerts up in Canada and Julian's wasn't written yet. And then Matt Carlson is the one where I'm actually playing live with Matt. So I can't do that unless Matt's there.
Sure. Okay. So, that's interesting.
Yeah. So his was like very specific. So for him, he took like a recording of improvisation and then was kind of like, okay. And then we kind of went back and forth a little bit on, maybe like some multiphonics that blend into each other and, kind of things like that. But otherwise he just went and wrote it.
Like my question when I was like, what kind of boundaries did you give them? It sounds like the boundaries that you gave them were like, this is the world in which I live, compose in this world. That's awesome.
Yeah. Or could you please, or if I didn't say it as directly, it's like they kind of knew the world in which I live. They knew me well enough. They played with me enough that they knew that was my world. Like Dana, we went back and forth when we were making the soundscape. She created the oboe part, and then when she was creating the soundscape, and I was like, oh, I love it when the oboe and the loon do such and such, and she's like, oh yeah. And so she made sure that those kind of line up, and then I can either make them line up or not, depending on how I choose. Dana's draws a lot on nature, and then there's like a lot of kind of like the chorally, but then there's a lot of like this really glitchy stuff as well in the background.
Yeah.
Taylor's is based on alluvium, which is like matter that's moved by water. So it's microtonal shift is his.
Oh, wow.
Was inspired by, I love this. It's like, his backyard in the summer, with like the dandelions and, things like that. And then Matt's is kind of like his music is really usually like really very complex and very quick moving. And he originally wrote that for oboe. When we got together, I was like, this would sound really cool with English horn. Can I try it with English horn? And he was like, yeah. So it ended up being English horn.
I'm curious how you made that decision. Like, what about it where you were like, oh, English horn is actually the right instrument for this?
I think maybe it was kind of in the, I don't know. I just remember I was like, can we, I think, oboe can sound kind of not tight, but there was something about like the synthesizer that I thought would sound really cool with an English horn.
Okay, cool.
And it was, and I think maybe it had been in the lower register of the oboe or something. And I was like, if we stuck this on an English horn, it would sit kind of in the middle. And then once we were playing it on English horn, then we kind of bumped things around. But it meant that we got like there's the very end of the piece like plays the low B on the English horn, which is like the lowest note you can play on the instrument. So it meant that we got a lot of bass. And then Silkies we did completely during the pandemic.
Okay, so you've got a lot of nature, like kind of butting up against synthesized and electronic sounds. It sounds like to me, like the duality there was really cool. Like to explore how those sounds could potentially mesh with each other. And then it's almost like you as the live oboist performer, that you were kind of like the piece of connectivity between them. Like it's, if you had to imagine like the oboe is somewhere in the middle of the spectrum between fully nature and like fully synthesized. That's what I got from it. I thought that was really
I like
cool.
That. I haven't really thought about that, but yeah, no, it's true. Because it's like, if you think of an instrument is technology, right?
Yes. But you're also a living, breathing person making the technology
right
really come to life. And it's like literally with your breath.
Right. So those two, the player encompasses both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just so cool. Happy, during the time, because even though they were recorded, but it was like they really kind of kept me company during the pandemic, because I've really missed playing with people. And so it was so nice to be able to be like, oh, I'm mixing this or whatever, to be thinking about those. I feel like their soundscapes and everything that they created really kind of kept me company.
I would love to know conceptually and performance logistic wise how the Silk Moths track worked, because you said you were performing with the Silk Moths.
So Silkies was supposed to be a live performance. I've raised Silk Moths the last 2 summers, which is really fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. My new hobby.
That's amazing. That's way a left turn from sourdough. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And my neighbor across the street has a mulberry tree, and there's another lady in our neighborhood, and so she collects, they need the mulberry leaves. And the past 2 summers I've been given like either the eggs or the pupa of the things of the
wow.
Yeah, so I've raised them, and now this year I have eggs that I'm going to hatch, hopefully in a couple of weeks, because the leaves are starting to come out. So the first time we got them, I was really enamored with these silk worms, and they made this really cool sound. It's like yang 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 yang. And so I was talking, and Stuart was like, "Well, why don't you make a piece with them?" And I was like, great idea. so I went up and I started trying to do it. And then I really quickly realized, I was like, I don't have the skills right now to be able to manipulate sounds like this. Like, and gratefully, there are people here that are really good at that type of thing. And I was at a CMG concert and sitting beside a friend of mine. And he said to me, I had sent him a draft of something I had put together with the silk moss. And he's like, there's something about it. Sounds really cool. I'm like, I know. I said, but I don't know how I can do that. And he's like, there are people in this room who are really good at that type of thing. And I was like, you're right. And so I went up, and I know Juniana from CMG stuff. And I went up to her and I was like,
and that's Creative Music Guild.
Yeah. Creative Music Guild.
Okay.
And I was like, so I have these moths and I'm really interested in them and I want to make some music with them. And she was like, awesome. So what Juniana did was she created a sound explorations from the two sounds that I gave her. One is the munching sound and the other was the buzzing of the wings. Okay, so she made these explorations and then I would play with them and be like, well, certain sounds that I can do work well with this and work well with that. And we kind of gradually, like we've kind of pulled ideas that we're each really interested in about the moths. Like they're one, for me, the thing is that they're long strand that they weave the cocoon from is, it can be like 1 kilometer long and it's a single strand.
Whoa.
One strand. And so
that's
like
what
that
they make their
idea,
cocoon out of. Okay.
Yeah, like weaving, right? And then they weave for hours and they make this movement that's like amazing to watch. So I was really drawn by that. So a lot of the oboe part is very kind of spinny and like a long line. And then afterwards I was like, maybe that's the final piece for my CD. Like I was waiting, it didn't feel done. I was like, there was something missing. And I was like, that's it. We put that on the end. And then as this pandemic has kind of been going on, it's like, I almost feel like what I had originally conceived is like, you know, like a dream sequence, like someone goes to sleep to nocturne, they have this night of like really unusual dreams and they wake up and they hear differently. You know, like all of a sudden it's like, it's taken on this, I don't know. It like, I feel like I've been cocooned in my life. And what is this thing that I'm going to come out of? And, you know, we've been having all these like micro and macro experiences the whole time, right? Like we can talk to people across the globe, but we can't talk to our neighbors. And so there's all these levels of everything kind of interacting, which kind of seems, so then it almost felt like the album is about a moth, or it's about like evolution. It's about this change that we don't know what it is. And then the actual cover is actually a picture of I felt like I was shedding a skin, or maybe I am. And it's like it's a shed instar skin of a silkworm moth. So there's kind of like this whole moth thing throughout the whole, but then I feel like the world, we've all been kind of cocooned.
Once again, you can pick up Catherine's new album, Remote Together, on Bandcamp, CD Baby, iTunes, and Amazon beginning on May 21st. Go to catherinemlee.com for information on the virtual release party. And that's our show for today. Our theme music is composed by Not Dead composer Thomas Barber. Check out his stuff at thomasbarber.com. Web development support is provided by Tina at citybeautifuldesign.com. Keep Classical Weird is created and edited by me, Casey Bozell. Find us on Facebook and Instagram. And check out our podcast shop by going to keepclassicalweird.com and clicking the link that says Buy Stuff at the top of the page. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Stay safe and stay weird.